All right, folks. So a huge welcome to everybody to tonight's session in the Player Education webinar series, which is focusing on fun athletic development in the off season for young players. So, yeah, for a lot of us, whether young or not so young, we're definitely at that stage of the season where you're either maybe just post season or else coming into pre-season as well. So yeah, the session tonight will focus on athletic development and maybe some of the activities that we can do at this point of the year to, I suppose, continue to develop athletically at this time of the season. So my name is Ailish Ward. I'm the head of player development with the LGFA, and I'm also joined by Sarah Murphy here on tonight's call. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the Connacht Development Officer with the LGFA. So I'm part of the national development team, and I'm based down in the Connacht Centre of Excellence. So I
Brilliant.
have a bit of a background in coaching and stuff, as well as studied sports science previously. So I'm excited about the webinar tonight and to get stuck into the athletic development side of things.
Perfect. Thanks a million, Sarah. And yeah, I suppose for tonight's webinar, we have a couple of different areas sorry, that we're going to cover. So firstly, we're going to look at, I suppose, what athletic development is, and I suppose get you guys talking a little bit around that. We're then going to start to look at actually what are the components of athletic development. We'll move on then to why it's important. Okay, so I suppose the first three areas are really going to give us a bit of an understanding around what athletic development is and why actually do we need that within Gaelic games. And then from there, what we're going to look at is actually how you can start to build this maybe into your off season. So some of the activities that you can do to start to develop some of these components. And then finally, we'll look at really quickly just some practical tips for engagement and motivation. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody on the call. And that's what you've joined us here this evening for. So just to get started, what we want you to do in the chat. So just from your own perspective for anybody on the call, we just want you to write in the chat, I suppose, what you think athletic development is. That can be a one-word answer, that can be a whole definition. We're certainly not expecting everybody to start rhyming off definitions here on the call tonight, but just if anybody has any answers, any words that you think of when you think about athletic development. So if you could start to type those in the chat there. Brilliant. Can start to see some answers come in there. Fantastic. Lots of fitness. Just what we love to train at any stage of the season, I think. We also have speed, flexibility, stamina, fitness, retain numbers and keep the interest up. Yeah, absolutely. All those things be involved in this. Fitness, balance, correct movement. There's so many answers and I can barely keep up with the chat here, but being fit enough to meet the demands of the game, yeah, really important. Skills, strength, coordination, balance, loads of good answers there already, and keep those coming in, guys. I suppose in terms of the technical definition, and we, as I said, we don't want to get too wordy, but based on the sports science framework for Gaelic Games, which was produced this year, which has an expert team behind it, athletic development is defined as the holistic development of athleticism over time to optimize physical fitness. So as we can see there and through the chat, lots of mention of physical fitness and various different components of that. But what does that actually mean without getting into definitions? So I suppose, more simply put, it's really the various movements and physical competencies that we need in order to play sport. All right. So if we look at anything that we do, not just on a Gaelic pitch, but I suppose, any type of sport, it's the fundamental movements and the skills that we need to be able to do in order to play that sport properly. So we just want to bring in a little bit of a video here now, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this video. Hopefully people recognize the player on the left of the screen there. So we have Amy Mackin, who is a multiple all-star within Gaelic games, within Ladies Gaelic. She's also a former player of the year, a fantastic footballer, okay? And the clip that we're going to show is one of the goals of the year, or one of the nominated goals of the year from 2020 that Amy scored in a match against Dublin, okay, when she was playing for Armagh. Now, what we want you to do, there's lots of people. I think you nearly see most members of both teams in this clip, but I want you just to have a little look initially at the different players within this clip and start to look at maybe some of, I suppose, the components of athletic development or physical fitness that you can see. All right. So, um, just a bit of a warning. I suppose Amy doesn't come into screen until the very end of the clip, but you'll very quickly see her. You'll notice her once she does. Um, but have a look at all the players throughout and just start to have a wee think around, I suppose, the players that are there and the things that I suppose they have from an athletic development perspective that helps them play. All right, so we'll just pause that there for a little minute. But um, as you can see, it's a fantastic finish, if nothing else within that. But I'll continue to play this clip a couple of times in the background, and I want you to kind of focus, as I mentioned already, on different players. But people have started to do this already. We have, I think, 9 or 10 components of physical fitness or athletic development that we're going to list quite shortly on the right-hand side of the screen. But I want you to start to write into the chat maybe what you believe some of those components are. So we've started to see some of them already come through previously, which is great. But have a wee look here at this video again and see, is there anything else that you can pick up on that you think might be a component of athletic development, and write it in the chat.
Just to come back on the chat from earlier, Eilish, there's a few being added in there. So the likes of effective running mechanics and injury prevention, as well as stamina and proper warm-ups added to the kind of question at the start, what is athletic development? So some really good answers coming through.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Definitely, I see Felicity said acceleration, so we can see acceleration kind of all throughout that clip in different movements, as well as Grode said interplay and intermovement.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to go back to the start of this one last time here, and if we can start to pick up on, and maybe look from I can start to see some stuff coming in there, particularly from a defensive perspective. There's maybe things that you would focus on. If you look at the defensive movements compared to the attacking movements as well, you might pick up on different things. All right, so can see loads of stuff there. Turning on the run, feigning movement, acceleration, change of direction. Fantastic, guys. Lots and lots of stuff coming through. So these are, I suppose, some of the things here now that we would have noted. I'm going to pass over to Sarah, who's going to take us through each of those one by one.
So you can see the list in front of you. I know a lot of you have mentioned most of those, or have mentioned a few of them throughout the chat function. So we can see strength. Strength is the ability to create force. So we can see strength used in a number of different areas in this clip, particularly where the defender actually stands up the Armagh player coming forward. So it takes a lot of strength to be able to do movement like that. So we can see that used in that particular clip and throughout a lot of other areas of the game. We have speed next, which is defined as the ability to minimize the time cycle of a given moment. But speed, as a lot of us know, is that the ability to go fast when we run, and we can see that throughout that clip, and that's one that's definitely been mentioned by a lot of people in the chat function. Power is next, which we would describe as the ability to create maximal force in minimal time. So basically, we often see power and strength interconnected. So power is, you know, how strong we can do something in a given time. So we can see the power to kick the ball is huge. So yes, it takes strength, but if she kicked it really slowly, it wouldn't go as far. So we can see how power comes into things as well. So as well as training strength, we want to train power, because we need to be able to do things with strength, but we need to be able to do them quickly in Gaelic football particularly. So that's a really important one. Next, we look at aerobic capacity. So aerobic capacity is the maximal amount of physiological work that an individual can do as measured by oxygen consumption. So think endurance, middle to long distance running. We look at aerobic capacity. When a lot of you say fitness, this is often what we refer to. So people often refer to aerobic capacity as fitness or as cardiorespiratory fitness, which is kind of, you know, how long can we keep going? And that endurance, that long endurance of middle or long distance running, comes down to our aerobic capacity. Anaerobic capacity is slightly different. We think of sprinting or like short, sharp movements with anaerobic capacity. So it's defined as the maximal work performed during maximum intensity or short-term physical effort. So it's like an individual sprint phase, usually 1 to 2 seconds. So it's that really quick, short, sharp movements, and speed would often be interchangeable with anaerobic capacity. So balance and coordination are next. We see those throughout the clip a lot as well, particularly in the goalkeeper, how they balance and coordinate, and Amy McInerney herself, how she, when she kicks the ball, how she moves from one foot to the other to come over and actually take the shot on in the end. There's a lot of balance and coordination used in that. So balance and coordination is described as the ability to perform movements with precision and grace. So we can see that, again, like I said, throughout the clip, and balance and coordination are something that's probably not focused on enough within sport, and yet it's a really, really important part of it. So in terms of our hand-eye coordination, how we move the ball from our hand to our foot, how we move it across our body, and how we move our whole body ourselves, is a really, really important part of the sport, and something that definitely shouldn't be neglected in times of the year like this, where we're in like an off season or pre-season, and we're trying to get kids prepared for sport, particularly when kids are going through puberty. So when we look at teenage girls in sport, they're often growing and going through different growth phases, and things like balance and coordination can be massively affected by that. So it's really important that we're trying to focus on that a little bit throughout our athletic development sessions. So next we look at agility. Agility is the ability to be nimble on your feet and move quickly from one movement pattern to another. So you can see, again, the likes of the goalie and Amy McInerney herself are very good examples of agility throughout that clip. Stability then is the ability to prevent movement in one part of the body while creating movement in another, plus protecting vulnerable areas. So stability is a really, really important part of injury prevention in sport. So I see a couple of people have mentioned injury prevention throughout the chat earlier, and definitely stability is really important in that, so that we're able to control our movements, and particularly, you know, if we're stopping quickly, that we're not like falling forward, and that we're able to manage that. So again, something that's really important to be focused on in like an off season or earlier in the year. Mobility then, just as important, is the flexibility in motion and our range of motion through muscles and joints. So a lot of people have mentioned change of direction. We see a lot of change of direction throughout that video. We can see, you know, turning on the move, turning on the go, as that was mentioned earlier as well. And the likes of mobility comes into that big time. As well as even being able to move back, run backwards, and all those sort of things kind of fall under agility and mobility as well. So all really important components, and when we add them together, they become really, really useful tools to play our sport at a high level. So definitely things we can all be working on individually and collectively throughout this time of the year. So we'll look a bit at why athletic development is important. So if you want to start putting it into the chat function again, why do we think athletic development is important. And as you see, you know, things like injury prevention was mentioned earlier, but any other reasons why it's really important. I know we've got things earlier on like the retention of numbers, keeping the interest up. All those things are vital as well. But any other reasons, don't be afraid to type away and get involved. So we'll just give you a minute or two there if you want to pop something into the chat. Brilliant, Jennifer, thanks. So that allows players to perform better on the pitch, definitely. So that's really what we're huge part of our athletic development is about how that transfers over onto the pitch, that we're not looking at it in isolation as just how are we looking at athletic development. We're looking at athletic development for ladies Gaelic footballers, so how it transfers over onto the pitch is really, really important. Martin said to enjoy football better and to stay participating longer. Yeah, really, really important. Thanks, Martin. Growth is coming in, gives confidence, definitely. So the better we are in these areas and how we build up our athletic development, definitely gives us better confidence both on and off the pitch. So that's really, really important. We've got supports players' ability to manage the physical demands of the game. Yeah, brilliant. Injury prevention makes the game more enjoyable. True, that's a really good one, and that's something we're kind of looking at a little bit this evening as well. Good for mental health and feeling better in themselves. Yeah, brilliant. Players have the stamina to keep going. Absolutely. I always say to a lot of the kids I'm coaching when they're giving out, when we're running, I'm going, but what if we were in the middle of a game? You know, when you get to the third quarter of a game and you're absolutely wrecked, and you can see the other team and they're starting dying off, and you're going, isn't it such a comforting place to be, to turn around and go, oh, but we've got the legs, we'll keep going, and we've got the legs on them. And you always hear coaches saying that, and it's really good one, because it's where we actually see kind of the real life effects of it. So, you know, we've done our running, we have that in the bank, and we're good enough to keep going and to outrun them when in the kind of last quarter of the game. So you're like, yeah, we're tired, but look at them, they're a lot more tired than we are. So brilliant to see another one coming in there to allow players to reach their potential, play their best football, to help players cope with the rigors of a long season. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks, guys, to everybody that has added to that. So a couple of the reasons we have here why athletic development is important to us. So allows us to play better, or even full stop. So although we want to improve our athletic development, it's athletic development in the beginning that allows us to play and then to optimize our performance. So as we get that bit older, go from, you know, our under 14, under 12s, under 14s, right up to minor, even adult level, we want to start looking at optimizing performance. And the reason the focus on athletic development at that level is definitely to improve our playing and our performance. So as we've mentioned throughout, and as you've all been kind of mentioned in the chat, to help prevent injuries, which is really, really important at all levels. So we see a lot of injuries even at younger ages with people playing other sports, and kind of adding to a lot of the long seasons, as mentioned as well. Injuries can be really common. So the more we improve on our athletic development, the less likely that is to happen. To support skill development. So this one's really important that we don't overlook it. So, you know, that athletic development isn't one side of the spectrum and then actual, you know, our playing football different sides, so that the whole thing is interconnected, so that it supports our skill development. So obviously if we are built up strength in our legs, we're going to be able to kick the ball a bit further, so that there's always a reason why we're doing things. We're not just going into trying to maybe go into the gym or lift weights just for the sake of it, or do exercises just for the sake of it. That we're trying to, when we're looking at our athletic development, we've got to focus on our performance and on our Gaelic football. So it can allow us to play for longer, whether that's short, medium or long term, and prepares us to play Gaelic, which is really, really important. So there are a couple of the reasons, guys. I know you've all mentioned different ones of those throughout the chat. So I will pop you back over to Ailish now to look at a kind of planning sessions.
Yeah, so we've obviously wanted to give you a bit of the base around, I suppose, what athletic development is and why it's important, just so that we're really clear before we move into the next part. I suppose before we start looking at any of the activities or any of the drills or the movements involved, we just wanted to give people, a bit of a sense of what you potentially need in terms of equipment. And I think the main piece of advice here is essentially you should make this as easy as possible. And we want everything. The reason we've said like a ball and that's it is essentially any of the athletic development stuff that we do, you can essentially use body weight for most things. And the reason we want the ball is then, well, essentially, we're Gaelic players at the end of the day. We want to make things as specific as possible, okay? And particularly if we're building in skills challenges or building in little bits of ball work in between stations and between drills. Um, that's the main reason that we want a ball. There's other bits and pieces that you might want to use or that we might refer to, cones, poles, ladders, mini hurdles, resistance bands, different bits and pieces. But I think for any of the stuff that we're going to outline over the next kind of couple of slides, these are all adaptable to use as little or as probably much equipment as you want or need. You can use minimal weights if you want, but just we'd always say with any sort of weight building or anything like that, make sure that you don't overextend at the start in particular and build that up over time. And that will be a similar principle. We'll talk through this later on as well around what we kind of call, the stamina piece or the aerobic fitness. And yeah, the next, I suppose, kind of couple of slides as well, what we will start to give you are kind of some of those sample drills. We'd love for you to come in at any stage throughout. We've kind of broken these down into the various components and then some of the exercises that focus on those. But what we would say is please feel free if you have your own ideas or have your own drills or things that you use within your sessions that you say, actually, we've got a really good way of doing this. I love it, the girls love it, whatever it is. Please write those through the chat at any stage because ultimately, you guys are out there on the ground either playing or coaching or doing whatever you are doing, and you probably have as much experience and knowledge in this area as well. All right, so just I suppose in terms of the warm-up, we would generally say, with a warm-up in this area of athletic development, you're essentially looking, I suppose, to build various aspects, and from what you can see on the screen, of stability and mobility, and a lot of these activities here will build balance and coordination as well. And these things, you might commonly see a lot of these as well now done, if it's at senior team level, minor team level, if you're watching matches on the TV, you might see a lot of this kind of mobility or range of movement pieces done prior to players actually doing a pitch warm up or things like that. But these can all be used as mobility exercises, as strengthening exercises within their session themselves. All right. And these are just some sort of ideas as well. These sorts of things will actually start to build little bits of strength and power as well as we go throughout. The other thing I would say, we'll put in, obviously the session's being recorded here tonight, but we will put in some links as well at the end of the session so that you'll kind of get access to any of these resources as well that we mentioned throughout, so that we're just kind of picking and choosing a couple of areas because obviously we have a limited time period tonight, but you can go in and look at those. And yeah, not to go through everything here, but we see things such as mini band marches, which are just kind of forward, backward, sideward steps, again, integrated movement throughout. We'll see things such as leg swings, single leg RDLs. Any of these activities, as we say, can really form the basis of a really good warm up, particularly for any sort of athletic development. All right. And just on this slide here now, we're going to run through another video again. But what we'll start to see here is, I suppose, some of these static movements that we've seen on the previous slide and some of the, I suppose, the cartoon caricatures, starting to build in more movement-based competencies as well of those. So whilst I suppose if we go back, these are all obviously static. What we'll see here now from this video is, it's not a case of having to do all those activities in isolation. Actually, we want to be doing them on the move. We want to be building them into existing practice, okay? So here we'll see a bit of a warm-up activity from one of the Gaelic for Teens sessions, which will build through some of these. So here we see our single RDLs. We'll not focus on every young person within this clip, but you'll obviously see different ranges of movement as well within this, or different techniques or mastery of the techniques throughout. And here they're moving on to bear crawls. And again, this is where you really want to look at, I suppose, what the fundamentals are of some of these movements, and then break it down. And then finally, I suppose this one isn't necessarily on the previous page, but these are, I suppose, crab walks. Sarah, is that what you would call them? But these are things, again, it's just all starting to build in. So instead of, I suppose, doing quite a few static movements, you kind of want to bring these into, I suppose, a little bit more of a dynamic warm-up. Would that be fair to say, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially at a younger age, things like this can be really enjoyable. They work in our good Irish weather. Sometimes things like this work a lot better inside. So if you have, your under 14s, under 16s, maybe meeting up once a week, once every second week, in a hall this time of the year, things like that are brilliant. Astro's a good one for things like that as well, because it's not quite as wet. But huge strength in your arms. I mean, if you turn around now after this call and try and get down and do a crab walk like that yourselves, I promise you, your shoulders and your arms, your range of motion, or range of movement in your arms is kind of pushed as well as that, and it engages your core as well to try and keep your body up. So you can see a lot of the girls, particularly this girl in the front here, which is a good angle to look at, the way her kind of body is dropped down. So if you get them to do that a couple of times, ask them then to lift up their hips, and it really engages their core and gets them to do that as well, whilst it's also really fun. So if you're moving around, like, they'll get a great kick out of things like this. And I think that's a really, really important part of coaching, is that we're mixing the fun with the useful, so that we're trying to, there's a really good benefit to it, but also they're really enjoying it. And that's the sort of things that we want to try and include throughout our full session, as well as the warm-up.
Yeah, and just for that, like, obviously, in this scenario, there's a coach leading the session, but equally, I'm sure there's players on the call. You can do this in group scenarios. You can do this, on a one-on-one scenario. So we'd say with any of the stuff that you see on the screen, this can nearly be, I suppose, put to scale as well. So you can do this, by yourself. You can do this in a small group with another partner. You can also do it in a little bit of a bigger group if you have maybe 4 or 5 years that go down to a pitch or a house. Or equally, as Sarah says, if you're in a wider session like this, you can definitely start to build in, and once you have a little bit more space. So Sarah, I think Sarah's going to take this part here now around strength and power.
Yeah, so we can see here a couple of different exercises kind of listed on the left-hand side. So to develop strength and power, fundamental movements such as squats, rows, push-ups, plank and hinge can form great foundations for developing strength, power, and stability. So you can see having the capabilities within these movement skills will support all players with the foundation to playing. So if we look over on the left-hand side, we can see our baseline movements in the middle. And then either side of that, we've got regressions and progressions. So a regression is to make things easier, and a progression is to make things a bit harder. So we look at the goblet squat, which is with a weight. So there's no need, we can pick up a dumbbell. Or any young students themselves can know the weight of their own school bags. So pick up the school bag and use that as a weight, or then to regress that, we can just use body weight, and then alternatively, as a progression, we can move that to a split squat. So different things throughout our exercises here. We can see like a hinge with a band. So again, a resistance band is really good for exercises like that, or alternatively to do it with a body weight. If people are doing these at home on their own, I'd encourage you to, if you haven't done them before, to look at some videos on YouTube. So there's some really good like videos that gyms or strength and conditioning coaches have put up on YouTube where you can see a really good movement pattern of these exercises, which means it allows you to have a better idea of what you're trying to do. Also, for any of those like squats or hip hinges, if you haven't done them before, look at yourself in the mirror. So I would encourage you to do it in front of a mirror, particularly if you're making up a session yourself at home and doing it on your own. So yeah, stand in front of the mirror, see have you got the pattern right, turn to the side, see how you're doing with it. But these are really good exercises to be implemented into a session to develop strength and power. The likes of the plank, the push-up. Again, we can do a push-up from our knees, or raise push-up, which means it's that bit easier. And then like an inverted row, which you'd need a bar for. But those exercises can be very good to build a foundation for a program and allow you to kind of build up your own strength, whether it's on your own or in a group setting. In terms of doing it in a group setting, they can all be included as part of a circuit, where you have certain people might be doing a squat while other people are doing hinge, other people are doing planks. Again, the majority of them need absolutely no equipment at all, so they can be done in a session, whether it's on the pitch, on an astro, in a hall where you have no equipment or very little equipment, if you want to include a little bit. So there's a video here we can have a quick look at. We'll actually go on first to go through a few more movements. So you can see these desirable movements will further develop and build the foundations for speed and power. The activities can condition us better to cope with in-game demands such as catching, kicking, hand passing, and general running. So as Amy said earlier, if there's any of these sort of stuff that you include into your own sessions or any ways that you use to develop strength and power, whether that's running a session yourself or whether it's on your own, or if you're actually coaching a session, don't be afraid to drop them into the chat as well and let us know, and kind of we can learn from each other as well. For everybody else that's in the chat might be able to see that. So we can see here things like jump and land. So really important. We can see how much that comes into Gaelic football. So as we move on a little bit in our strength and power training, we can see things like med ball, throw and catch. So again, how you're practicing that throw and the catch and movement, which is reutilized throughout Gaelic football. And the likes of the side planks really good for building up, the muscles either side of your body, which are very good for stability wise, as well as injury prevention, that you're able to kind of manage your own weight on the ground a bit better. Things like a single leg bridge, hugely beneficial to prevent hamstring injuries, which can be a hugely prominent injury within ladies football. So really important, building up things like a single leg bridge. And we can see kind of in that image the way their heel is a bit in kind of close to their bum. The further you move your heel out, the more you're putting the weight on your hamstring opposed to your glute, and it can be really beneficial to reduce hamstring injuries. So if you're doing some sort of a mobility program beforehand, or you're using these exercises to build a session, I'd really include people that want to focus on injury prevention to include a single leg bridge, or otherwise if you're going to regress it down to a 2-leg hold or up to a 1-leg hold. So yeah, they're really good exercise. So things like a lunge, brilliant to look at your strength, stability, balance, all included in a lunge, and it's used to kind of build your relative strength, which would also help you increase your speed and other fitness components. So a lot of those, again, like your landing, really important. We're building up that coordination as well as our stability, mobility, all that is used in a lot of these exercises, but really important for building a base of a program using exercises like this that focuses on strength and power.
And just coming in there, Sarah, like I think like we were talking about this before we came on the session, you mentioned there around the relative strength, and the importance of that. Sometimes it's very difficult, like if you're a player or you're working with players, to maybe see actually how does this relate to the game or to what I'm doing. But things such as having that base strength, particularly in our legs, will give us that foundation for building that speed then. And if we're starting to think about, applying this to the pitch, if we just look at the top of the screen there around the jump and land, actually being able then to take off and some of the lunging patterns will start to kind of mimic some of that as well. That's really, do you know, if you're jumping up to catch a high ball and then the next thing you're hitting the ground and then you're off, it's that acceleration phase as well. So we can start to see how that sort of comes into the game-based scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in kind of a sports science side of things, we'd often say, you know, power builds speed, and, you know, speed always comes from power, and that immediate acceleration and speed is very, very interconnected with our strength and power. So it's really, really important. And that can be seen hugely on the pitch if you watch players. You know, if you can pick out players, sometimes you say, oh yeah, they're a really strong player, you'll often see that their speed and their acceleration will be a lot better than their, what we would say, their aerobic capacity, so than their long endurance running. So often, like, those stronger players are very good at that quick running, that quick, short, sharp running, and then but wouldn't be able to maintain it for as long. So even in a real life scenario, we can kind of see that. But yeah, absolutely, strength and power, strength and speed, very interconnected. So we can see here a movement of a video of a session. So do you want to chat through that a little bit more, Lish?
Yeah, so just we'll just see. I'll just pause it here. And I was laughing, all the babies keep coming up on the screen before we got started. I don't know how to get that off, but anyway, so we can see here on the screen this session has been split into kind of two main sides of the hall nearly. So on the left-hand side, we have two stations focusing on movement and skill, which we haven't really covered yet. But and then on the right-hand side, you'll start to see some of those movement patterns, or some of those, I suppose, strength stations, stability stations, core stations that we've talked around. So things that will give you that core pillar strength and stability. And this can all be set up as kind of like a circuit scenario, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, work in pairs. You know, whatever way you want to do that, that will obviously be dependent on the nature of your sessions, how many people are there, or whatever it is, or if you're working on your own. But we can start to see here the way that things can start to be grouped together within a session, and even within this really short clip. You know, we have 5 stations and 5 activities that are working on various areas of the body. So we'll just play this through here now quickly. And Sarah, just to come back to you again there, because I know we were talking around this before the session, but you mentioned, I'll just maybe clip this back again and just play it through, but around the nature building these sessions around the cardiovascular fitness versus the strength aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can see here on the left hand side of the screen the movement quality and skill station, where the kids are running. So although they're doing a lot while they're running, they're using their aerobic energy system there on the left hand side where they're running, and what we would say they're using that kind of fitness, that kind of cardio respiratory fitness where they'll tire out quickly. So then you move on to that. You know, we look on at the screen and that looks like the exciting part of the session where they're moving a lot and they got the balls involved and stuff. But then we move over here to the kind of strength and stability stations. You know, if you get them running enough, then they're looking forward to that strength and stability station. So those girls that are squatting are using a different energy system to the girls on the left hand side, which means they're actually able for that. They're not tired in terms of being able to squat, but yes, they're a bit tired to keep running. So, you know, if we include things like that and build our session in that way, it makes the exciting part on the left hand side enjoyable, but then also they're looking forward to the strength bit because they're like, oh yes, okay, I get to stand up and squat now for a minute before I go back into the running section. So when we include a session like that and build it, even if you're doing a circuit, then we build it kind of more an aerobic fitness and then maybe a strength where we do kind of a, you know, a more cardiorespiratory kind of taxing exercise as such on one side, and then we go into a strength exercise. It's really good to build up those both movements, as well as kind of giving them that rest per se between the movement and skill stations. So you can see here, like, they're doing, the kids on the left hand side are running a lot, and then the girls on the other side get to kind of take that little rest. So it's good, a good way to build a session. both group sessions, and if you're just doing a session on your own, that you can kind of include both of those.
Perfect. And then just to move on to endurance and stamina, or aerobic capacity, however you want to word this. So this is really dependent on how much you need to build into your sessions or into your off season will really depend firstly on your current level of endurance or stamina, but also your age profile, whether that's you as an athlete yourself, or if you're coaching athletes of a certain age. So particularly if we're working with under 14, under 16s, we probably don't need to focus as much on this area, as they tend to naturally have a base, which does tend to decline over time. So you might want to obviously work on that a little bit, but it tends to differentiate as we get older. We tend to need to work on these areas a little bit more. So you can kind of split things down to, without going into too much detail, into two main types of sessions. So you might want to do some prolonged effort sessions. So these will be things that you can do with or without a ball. At this stage of the year, you might be doing it twice a week, and I would generally say 20 or 30 minutes would be enough. And this is really slow or medium pace stuff. I used to work in athletics, and we used to talk a lot around the talk test. So if you imagine myself and Sarah going out for a run together, you have that ability where you're a little bit out of breath, but you're still able to kind of hold a conversation. Whereas as you start to kind of progress to more medium pace, you'll start to find that actually you're more out of breath, and then you're kind of go into that, you can get one or two words out. That's probably not, and once you start to get to that stage, you're kind of going over to the other side of the screen, which will build up. And then within that as well, you can also do shorter and sharper pieces. And these be more medium to faster pace. This would be, I suppose, set up in a way that it would be a lot shorter work. Again, at this stage of the season, you probably don't need to focus on this stuff as much. Really, at this stage of the year, you're really looking at giving yourself an endurance and stamina base. So you're probably focusing on more to the left-hand side of the screen. But equally, for either of those types of sessions, what you want to do is start at your relative base. So there's no point, say for example, if I as a player cannot run 5k, for me to be going out in my first week and saying, right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to run 6k. You're not going to be able to do that. But what you might want to say is, I'm going to set a target for myself. I want to be able to run for maybe the 30 minutes consistently in the space of 6 weeks. So there'd be ways of building that up. And there's various different types of sessions within that, things such as hill training, interval training, fartlek training, which is, I suppose, an example of that would be run for 1 minute, then you're off for 1 minute. And there's other different types of training as well within that, even just continuous low intensity running, okay? They'll always say, I suppose, from a running aspect, that no miles are junk miles. So at this stage of the year, I suppose anything that you can be doing within this area to kind of build up that natural base can be really, really useful. But as you start to go into season, it would be looking to get more sport specific and more Gaelic specific at that point, okay? And again, there's probably lots of different bits and pieces through various resources online where you can start to look at different shorter, sharper drills within that area. So we're going to move on to speed now, and I think Sarah's going to come back in a little bit. I know people mentioned at the start there around sprint mechanics, so I think, Sarah, you had a couple of points earlier around some key things that we probably look for in that.
Sorry, it's muted there. Yeah, absolutely. So things like speed and anaerobic capacity are really important as well. So it's often what we look at. It's not the long-term endurance stuff. It's very short, sharp movements, and that kind of sprint mechanics is a big one as well. So we look at this, how we can build up those exercises. Again, this is a really good time of the year to bring it in. I always bring in speed and those sprint mechanics immediately after our warm-up. So if we want to train speed, we want to do it rested. So we're not going to do it at the end of a session. It's kind of like a bit of an old wives' tale that we'll go sprinting after a running session. So really we want to try and bring that in early in our session, ideally directly after a warm-up where we're just warmed up and ready to go, but we haven't done anything too taxing. So we bring in speed there. Things like our sprint mechanics and our running mechanics, simple activities like arm swings can develop really good sprint mechanics. So things like our hip to lip. So in terms of bringing our hand from our hip right up to our lip. So kind of that movement of our arms up and down. What I often do with a lot of the younger girls is I get them to sit down. So especially if you're in a hall or during the summer, it's nice and dry, or on an astro, get them all to sit down, and we're doing that hand movement, that arm movement. We're moving from our shoulder and getting in that like shoulder drive, those arm swings, which is really good to build that up before you kind of go into the running. Because you'll often see lots of kids running and their arms are kind of moving across their body, and it just slows them down. It doesn't, in terms of if they do it properly, it can really increase their running economy and build up good sprint mechanics. So we can do things like that to build it into actually running. Once we stand up, we start with our arm swings, and we can kind of move into a bit of marching then. As we start marching, we focus on opposite arm to leg. So while we're using our right leg, we're lifting our left knee, so that we're using opposite hand to leg. And build that into a marching process, and then get into kind of build up the speed into a more run. So things like wall drives and all that can also be built into that section of our session. High knee lifts are really important, so we can start that from a really young age, getting kids to come jump over hurdles, to run, not jump over, but run over hurdles, so they get into that practice of lifting their knee really high. And that high knee drive is really important in running, and in good running, and it builds up very good sprint mechanics to be able to lift our knee up. So we can do that in older people, in marching, as well as with the hurdles, but as well as trying to build it into sessions. Hurdles are very good if we've got them, but if not, it can be done without them, no problem. Things like poles flat on the ground, cones, get them to lift their knee over cones, or just kind of talk through them, especially if you're doing a session on your own or with a couple of people. It's really easy to do it without any equipment, to just be able to say to kind of lift your knee that bit higher. So there's a bit of video here on kind of that movement quality that we'll have a quick look through. So we can see here on the left-hand side of the video where they're running through the hurdles. So, the girls just running through them. They're not taking much heed of what they're doing, but it's really building up that habit of lifting our knee really high. Again, going through the ladders is that lifting up our knees and getting that kind of key ground contact as we come down as well. So movements like that are really important and very easy to incorporate into a session. And incorporating in a really fun way as well. We can build in our speed and our kind of sprint mechanics.
And again, there's just throughout this video, there's loads of different examples, things that have been already mentioned, but the acceleration, you can see even the different types of jumping, change of direction pieces there. And I think then we will have another video as well on the next slide. So we can just wait for this to play.
Yeah, so we can see here again all the different movements. So how they have to run through a ladder to start. So we're lifting up our knee to do that. And then they're turning, going around the cone. So we can see that kind of change of direction, the run backwards and to come out again and go back over the hurdles. So just you're incorporating lots of different kind of developments into that, to be able to, then we can see actually bringing in the football there, which is really important and obviously makes it very realistic, that kind of running backwards and lifting their knee. So even the habit of holding a football while lifting their knee that very high, because you often see people will include like high knees into a warm-up, but they're not used to lifting their knees that high while holding a football. So something as simple as that is, if you're even doing it, as part of your warm-up or as part of a session, doing high knees, that we include the football and make it that bit more realistic and kind of closer to a game scenario as possible.
Yeah, and then just to kind of move on quickly, again, just developing the speed, agility, and again, bits and pieces around stability, because in order to be able to be stable when, say, for example, a player is taken off in the match, if we're moving side to side, players really need to be able to practice that, or you need to be practicing that within your own time. And that's quite easy to do. There's a couple of, I suppose, examples of drills up here on the screen at the moment. So T-shaped drill, where you literally just set out cones like that, run up to the top, and then quick change of direction to the side, again, pick up the cone. You know, if you're doing this in a one-to-one scenario or by yourself, you can just pick up the cones and time yourself to see how you're kind of doing that or how you're improving. And equally just cap the pole. So again, just running around, you know, picking up cones and then putting them on the poles. You know, you can, again, these are things that can be done, or there's multiple ways that you can take the drills that are on the previous few videos or the previous few slides, from a plyometric, from an acceleration, from a speed perspective, that these can all be adapted, and they're very easy to do and very easily interchangeable as well. And I suppose if we're really working on particularly speed, you know, Sarah mentioned it as well, and particularly max speed, it's actually probably a day that you're feeling maybe a little bit tired, might be the day to actually work on your sprinting. Because in order to truly work on max speed, we need to give ourselves lots of rest. So the general rule of thumb will be that if you're flat out doing an actual sprint for 10 meters, you technically be giving yourself 1 minute of rest, which if we think, you know, from a playing perspective, that we never get the time to do that within an actual training session. So if you're doing bits and pieces like that, that's where you can actually build in, say, for example, say 20-meter sprints or something like that, where you're working on your relative speed within that sort of short distance, giving yourself 2 minutes rest. But in that rest period, that doesn't mean that you need to be doing nothing. You can be doing some of that strength work, you can be doing some of those mobility pieces. So it's actually then maybe you're not actually doing huge or any really aerobic or endurance stuff those days, but actually you're building on the other facets that you mightn't actually get the time to work on as much within season. And then, you know, we mentioned at the start, it's really important. We want to make sure that we're obviously developing our skills, and particularly at this time of year. So again, we've just taken some of the videos from the Gaelic for Teens program. But these are just some skills challenges, you know. So punt kicking, you can build this on your own. You can do it, you know, if you don't have somebody to kick to, you can obviously kick against the wall. But this is a brilliant time of year to obviously be working on your skills development, but also to be working on your bad foot, as I would say as well. So yes, we do it on our right leg maybe 3 times, but also then doing it on our left leg then 3 times as well. And then also there's loads of the LGFA skill cards. So we've just picked out a few here. So looking at the hook kick, hand pass, fist pass, and again, these can all be built into individual challenges. As mentioned already, I will drop these into the chat at the end of the session. But really easy to build in a challenge for yourself or for a team, where you pick some of those, I suppose, key physical fitness components or key athletic development components, and then maybe building the skills challenges throughout, so that we're focusing on different aspects. And then finally, just thought this was a really nice one in terms of the shooting. This is something a little bit different. So this is a shooting challenge if you have the capacity to do this. But what you'll see is the player shoots from 4 different angles, essentially. So they come straight out and then they kick with their, I think, their dominant foot over the bar. Then they go out to the other side and then they kick to come back in and kick that way. And then they go into the center and they start to take the balls here. So you're changing the angle of approach each time as well. And then finally, you know, again, it's really important to build in, you know, fun aspects or games as well, if you have the capacity to do so. So if you are working with a bigger group, there's just some ideas up on the screen here at the moment. And these are things that can build, you know, they build some of those physical components in a different way. But also, you know, if you're working in a team environment, these are things that can build trust, cooperation, organizational skills. As well as all those things and those components of athletic development that we mentioned previously. So, you know, I often do this, the hoop circle in particular, whenever I'm in a group in a school, and it's very chaotic, I would say at times, but it gets people laughing. And sometimes even something like that at the start of the session, or building in one of those two, you know, little fun aspects whenever you're doing a session. And equally, if you're doing a session on your own, you know, you can maybe think of, right, is there some activity that I really, really enjoy that I can build in at the start and at the end? And then finally, just conscious of time. So I think Sarah's going to take us through the last little bit here around some of the practical motivation motivational stuff and tools for engagement.
Yeah, so just to finish up, we'll have a look at kind of a few tips before we go. So pick and choose the activities you want to do each session. So it's really important from a preparation point of view that we kind of have a look at that beforehand. So whether you're planning a session for yourself or you're planning a group session, particularly as coaches, if you're planning a group session and have a chat to your other coaches, pick and choose what you want to do each session. So that can be your skills, or as well kind of mix in the next to mix and match the components per session. So you kind of pick what components of physical fitness you want to, or components of athletic development that you want to do prior to the session. And then you're going, okay, I want to focus on aerobic capacity tonight. How are we going to do that? How are we going to include that in? And kind of build in the practical ball work or skills in between sets or as part of the activities. So things like your aerobic capacity, you can definitely build in the ball work. If you're doing running, give them a football with it, solo or whatever, while they have it. So things like that, have it decided beforehand what components you're going to do, and then build your kind of session around that. So to be adaptable, no problem if you don't have equipment, just use what you have. So again, the amount of work we can do in even a small room, if you're doing it yourself at home, kind of a session, an athletic development session, or if you're doing it on the pitch with a group, definitely we need very little equipment, and we can just work away on our own. So also involve your friends and add some music, so that makes it very exciting if we're doing a bit of a session, whether it's in a gym, at home, or at the club. Throw on your speaker and have a bit of music going, as well as kind of joining up with your friends. So particularly if there's kids on that are interested in building up their own sessions, see if one of your teammates or if somebody else is interested in doing the same thing, and kind of link up with them, and even just have one other person to do your session with can be really enjoyable. So then structure activities and sessions how you want it. So definitely the only thing in terms of structuring your sessions, I would say to try and put your speed part of the session close to the beginning, but otherwise build up, the things you like. You might want to leave your favorite thing to last, and do kind of whatever you, the kind of less likable things in the middle. If that's the way you want to put it. Or in terms of a coach, if you're planning a bigger session, definitely if you want to do an enjoyable section, add an enjoyable drill, or things like those activities that Ailish mentioned in the last slide, things like your tic-tac-toe and your hoop loop or whatever, put them into the middle of your session or the start of your session, where you're like trying to, build up the enjoyment, and then maybe you do something less exciting and maybe add in something else exciting in the middle and that sort of stuff. Have a good balance throughout the sessions. As well as we can build in other sports or activities at the stage of the year, if you wish, for motivation. So I always love the link over with other sports. You might be doing running mechanics or sprint mechanics with kids, and you'll spot somebody be going, oh, do you do athletics? You'll know from the way they're how they're running. Or even the basketball, we see it a lot in basketball. Kids that do basketball, their foot movement can be very good, and that kind of defensive stance in basketball, that we look like that kind of athletic position, are kind of skills that are probably better trained, better coached in basketball. So different things like that. There's good crossover with other sports that are really useful to our sport. So if you want to bring those things into sessions at this time of the year, it can be really enjoyable and keep kids motivated and entertained. Also, from a wider group point of view, sometimes you'll find the kids that are good at basketball or good at athletics mightn't be your best footballers. So it allows them a chance to kind of show off as well that they might be a bit better at those sort of sports. So it kind of makes it a more rounded and enjoyable experience as well. So encourage coaches to include that sort of thing. Or from kids' point of view, if there's school basketball or school sports, or I'm just picking basketball, but school sports, hockey or tennis or anything happening this time of the year, even if it's not something you want to do all year long, get involved this time of the year and practice. Good for your fitness and good for building up other areas of your athletic development, which can only help you from a Gaelic football point of view when you actually get into your own season. So that's a few tips we've there. Yeah. Thanks, Ailish.
Brilliant. No, thank you. Guys, that's pretty much it in terms of the content. I've seen it one or two questions already come in. I'll just put in the chat here as well. I think Mark has asked, can we post the links and the videos that we've sent through? So The session's being recorded, and this will be up on the LGFA YouTube, which I have put the link into the chat along with a lot of the other resources there. So people can hopefully take that, copy and paste it from the chat, and you can go and access that at any point. Whilst you're maybe having a look at those things, or as I say, if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat now and we'll get through them. The other thing is, once you leave the session, there will be a little survey will pop up on the screen. So we'd really, really appreciate it if you could just take the time. It'll literally take 2 or 3 minutes just to answer that. It just helps us review the session and the content to realize if it's pitched right, and help us build for the future. And if there's anything else that anybody obviously needs support with, I think most people have my email, or I'll just write it into the chat here now as well. But please feel free to, I suppose, get in touch at any time as well. Sarah, I did see one question come in already, which I'll come to. So when setting up hurdles to encourage knee lift, how far should hurdles be apart? So I would have some views on this, probably more from an athletics perspective, as that's what I previously worked in up until about a month ago. And hurdles was actually the last thing I coached within that. So although coaching hurdles for hurdles' sake is probably a little bit different, but is there any advice that you would have within that area from your own experience?
Yeah, so personally, like, it depends on your group a lot. So I would try and keep the hurdles pretty close together to encourage you to be more realistic to actually running. But that there's enough space between them all. But it's something that I wouldn't get caught up on, if I'm honest. You know, different groups will be different, but watch them run through them once or twice and you'll know straight away if they need to be a little bit closer, a little bit further apart. If it's the case that they're not used to going through the hurdles, sometimes I find it easier if you even, to start off, you can actually spread them out, and every second knee, like they might, you know, every second kind of run, they lift it up. So where they might take a step between each hurdle to get them into the habit of going over the hurdles correctly. But again, you can kind of move them, you know, after 1 or 2 goes if it's a case that you can clearly see they're not going through them properly. But I would try and keep them that bit closer together, and it does encourage them to be as close to a real life running scenario.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to really focus on that arm and that knee drive, you know, where we're looking for a lot of right angles, and you can't see me, but I'm driving my knee up into my desk at the moment, or that march that Sarah's mentioned previously. Even I would have done that with taller hurdles. Like the hurdles that we've shown on the screen are literally 6-inch hurdles. You might be going to 12-inch hurdles at max, maybe within a Gaelic session. You know, previously, say whenever I was working with actual athletics hurdles, you'd be keeping the distances actually quite narrow in some respects, because it really encourages them. They nearly don't have the space then, or you don't have the space to get away with bad technique, because you really have got to drive your leg up in the correct fashion. So it probably depends on what you're trying to develop. Once you're starting to go to the more natural running style, then you know you want people, or you'll want to bound a little bit more. So yeah, you'd probably space them out a little bit more then. Not necessarily something that is as relevant to tonight's session, but we can maybe come to it. Would you be able to briefly discuss how to eat during the off season? And thanks for the webinar. So thank you, Aoife. I suppose I'll come to that first, and then Sarah, maybe pass over to you if you have any views. So I think there's within the sport science framework, within Gaelic Games, they've done pieces of work. So if you just literally type that in to Google, that should come up. So it's the sport science framework for Gaelic Games, which was done this year, and they've split down into various different categories, looking at athletic development is one of them, but nutrition is the other one of those, which Sharon Madigan, who is the current nutritionist with the Irish Olympic team, so is obviously heavily qualified and probably much more qualified than me to be talking on this area. But I think at this time of year, you know, you're probably not doing the same level of training as maybe other points of the year. So maybe like little bits of reducing, you know, carb intake, but equally, you know, it will just depend on a personal scenario within that aspect. You know, you're probably just not needing to carb load to the same capacity if you're not playing matches or doing the same level of intensity of exercise. But Sarah, anything from your aspect within that?
Yeah, it depends hugely on the person as I said, but particularly the age group.
Mm,
So obviously if you're that bit older, like we're talking about minor players, and up to adult level, they might be trying to build up some muscle this time of the year. They might be doing a bit more strength, power work. At that age, they might be spending a bit more time in the gym. And we could be looking at trying to increase their protein and make sure they're eating enough for that amount of exercise. But if you're looking at younger players like your under 12s, under 14s, even kind of your younger under 16s, like their food intake shouldn't really be changing that significantly. Like Gaylor said, they might have been previously trying to eat, build up some maybe, carb load a little bit before games and sessions and stuff that they mightn't be trying to do as much. But honestly, particularly at the younger ages, I definitely wouldn't be trying to move them away like kind of from what's been cooked at home or what they've been given in school and try and kind of stick with that as well. So I wouldn't get too caught up on it at the younger ages, but definitely to have a look at the framework that Eilish mentioned. That's some really, really good information there and very specific stuff. But definitely it varies massively between the ages as well as kind of, the group or how competitive it is. So
perfect.
um
I
yeah.
think we just there's one last question, and then we'll wrap up. So, and I'll pass this to you, Sarah, quickly. Anyone exercise or warm up specifically for 12 to 13-year-olds for hip flexors?
Yeah, so there's lots of stretches you can do for hip flexors. So if you actually just look like that sounds like a bit of a cop out, but if you Google hip flexor stretches, there's some very good stretches where you kind of place one knee on the ground and lean forward. I find a big one for hip flexors is that knee rate, like that knee drive where we lift their knee up really high, or to get them to hold their knee. So if you get them to stand up tall, hands on their hips, and then lift their knee and just hold it, it's a good exercise for their hip flexors. And you'll find anyone that has kind of issues with their hip flexors will struggle in their sprint mechanics and stuff. So to kind of just build that up a little. So some people can hold it up for 3-4 seconds. Some people will be able to hold their knee up for 30 seconds, but try and get them to hold that at that 90 degrees, and it's a good one to build it up as well.
Perfect. And quickly, the name of the framework for Gaelic Games, if you just type in sports science framework, Gaelic Games 2023, that will come up in Google. Other than that, folks, thank you so, so much. We're gonna stop the share there and we're gonna hopefully stop recording. Just a huge thank you again to